Isaac Newton, the great scientist who discovered gravity, £3 million. Back in 1720, the man who discovered gravity fell victim to a different kind of force, the invisible gravity of greed. It began quietly. London, early 18th century, a city reborn from fire and plague. The air smelled like coal, money and ambition. Café overflowed with chatter. Merchants, nobles and clerks gathered around steaming cups of coffee, trading gossip about a new company everyone was talking about, the South Sea Company. It sounded glorious. Britain, victorious after decades of war, had just signed the Treaty of Utrecht. The South Sea Company claimed exclusive rights to trade with the Spanish colonies of South America. Gold, silver, exotic goods. To the public, it was a golden ticket. The 18th century version of AI will change everything. But there was a problem. They didn't actually trade much. They traded hype, and hype sells. Pamphlets, posters, rumors, all promising fortunes beyond imagination. Invest now or regret forever. It was the Twitter of its time, powered not by hashtags, but by whispers in candle-lit coffee houses. Isaac Newton wasn't just a scientist. He was also the master of the Royal Mint, a man deeply respected, financially savvy, and precise to the last decimal. He knew numbers. He understood value. So when friends told him about the South Sea Company, Newton studied it carefully. He decided to invest, modestly, early. Weeks later, the price soared. Newton doubled his money, then tripled it. Satisfied, he sold his shares. Smart move, calculated, rational. At that moment, the great Isaac Newton walked away, the perfect investor. But then, the price kept rising. Everywhere he went, dinner parties, academic meetings, royal events, people were bragging about how rich they were becoming. Men he considered fools were suddenly geniuses. Women he barely noticed before were now lecturing him about buying the dip. The crowd's laughter echoed louder than logic. And even Newton, the man who defined the universe by law and order, began to feel something new. FOMO, the fear of missing out. He told himself he was being analytical, not emotional. He convinced himself that this time the fundamentals had changed, that the South Sea Company had discovered a new form of value beyond reason. So he bought back in. He invested nearly everything at the very top. The year was 1720, the year London lost its mind. The streets turned into theatres of speculation. Servants mortgaged their savings. Priests preached about divine prosperity. Even the king himself endorsed the South Sea Company. Every newspaper screamed success stories. A tailor turned landlord, a widow turned millionaire, a clerk turned baron overnight. And then came the imitators. Companies with absurd promises flooded the market. A company for extracting silver from lead, a company for making salt water fresh, and the most infamous of all, a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. People still gave them money, because the game wasn't about truth anymore. It was about belief. Newton watched the mania spread like wildfire, but now he was part of it. His fortune grew, on paper. His friends called him a genius again. His confidence soared higher than the stock price itself, and yet deep inside he must have felt uneasy. He had discovered gravity, and he knew what happens to anything that goes too high too fast. Still, emotion drowned reason. Then, suddenly, gravity struck. Rumors of corruption surfaced, directors selling shares in secret, Parliament whispering investigations. The same streets that once celebrated began to panic. In days, prices began to fall. In weeks, they collapsed. By September 1720, the South Sea stock had dropped by over 90%. Fortunes evaporated, families ruined. London's joy turned to silence. And Newton, the world's brightest mind, lost nearly everything. He withdrew from public life. He refused to discuss finances ever again. And when friends asked what went wrong, he simply said the line that would echo through centuries. I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of men. But behind that legendary quote lay a deeper truth. Newton's downfall wasn't caused by ignorance. It was caused by intelligence, turned inward. Because the smarter you are, the better you are at lying to yourself. Newton had believed his own logic could tame human emotion. He thought the market was a machine, predictable, measurable, rational. But the market was never about math. It was about man. And men, unlike planets, don't obey the laws of motion. As the South Sea bubble burst, chaos consumed Britain. Thousands of investors lost their life savings. Suicides rose. Parliament was in uproar. Even the king's mistress had lost money. The scandal reached the highest levels of power, and the country demanded blood. Investigations began. Officials fled. A few directors were arrested. But for most, justice was an illusion, just like their prophets. Meanwhile, Newton retreated to Cambridge, back to his books and telescopes. But the damage was done. He wasn't just broke, he was broken. It's almost poetic. The man who defined the laws that govern stars couldn't define the chaos that governs hearts. He had spent his life proving that the universe is ruled by order, that every apple falls for a reason, that every planet follows a path. But he discovered, too late, that human behavior follows no orbit at all, because greed bends gravity. And when enough people believe in a dream, it becomes its own law until it collapses. The South Sea bubble wasn't just a financial event. It was the first mass psychological experiment in economic history, before psychology even existed. It revealed a truth modern investors still refuse to accept. Markets don't move on logic, they move on emotion. Newton's tragedy wasn't that he lost money, it was that he proved a new law, and a hidden one. The greater the intelligence, the greater the overconfidence. The higher the rise, the harder the fall. The more you think you're immune to greed, the faster it finds you. And that's where part one of this story ends, with Isaac Newton sitting alone in silence, surrounded by equations that could explain the stars, but not the storm inside the human mind. Because the question still lingers, if even Newton couldn't escape the madness of men, can anyone? After the crash, silence fell over London. The same streets that once roared with ambition now whispered with regret. Pamphlets that once promised fortunes now littered the gutters, soaked by rain and tears. The coffee houses, once packed with laughter and speculation, grew quiet, every whisper now a confession of loss. And somewhere in that silence, Isaac Newton sat alone. No calculations, no charts, just stillness. He had witnessed gravity, not in the falling of an apple, but in the fall of men. The South Sea bubble wasn't just a financial disaster, it was a mirror. It showed what happens when brilliance collides with desire. Because the same imagination that lets humans discover new worlds also lets them invent illusions too beautiful to resist. Newton realized something haunting. Markets don't move because of information. They move because of belief, and belief once inflated is unstoppable until it collapses under its own weight. He had seen numbers behave perfectly his whole life, but people never. Because numbers don't envy, numbers don't panic, numbers don't wake up at midnight wondering if they should have bought more shares. But people do. And that, Newton understood too late, was the real force that moves markets. Emotion, not equation. History likes to remember Newton as the genius who lost money. But his story is much bigger than that. He was one of the first victims of mass psychology, before anyone even had a name for it. Every bubble that came after, the Mississippi scheme, the dot-com boom, the cryptomanias, all echo that same melody: hope, greed, denial, collapse. It's a cycle older than capitalism itself, because it's not about money, it's about being human. When prices rise, logic disappears. When everyone wins, skepticism becomes blasphemy. When neighbors boast about profits, silence feels like stupidity. Even Newton, the man who could predict the path of planets, couldn't predict the path of his own fear of missing out. And maybe that's the cruel poetry of it all. The smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing your own greed. You don't say, I'm being reckless. You say, I'm being strategic. You don't say, I'm chasing the crowd. You say, I'm early. Newton wasn't at the first to fall for that lie, and he definitely wasn't at the last. After the crash, Parliament tried to rebuild trust. Directors of the South Sea Company were stripped of wealth and titles. Some were imprisoned, others vanished. But the deeper damage couldn't be repaired. The public's faith in logic, in order, in progress, was shaken. For a time, England itself lost its sense of direction. The dream of infinite prosperity had turned into a nightmare of infinite debt. The stock market, once a symbol of modern progress, became a cautionary tale whispered across generations, and in that shadow, Newton returned to what he always did best, seeking truth. He wrote, studied, observed, but he never spoke of the market again. It was as if that part of him had died, buried beneath the wreckage of his own certainty. Yet ironically, even in defeat, Newton had discovered something new, not about physics but about finance. He proved that no law of nature can protect a man from the laws of emotion, that greed moves faster than gravity, and that even the brightest minds can be blinded by the light of easy profit. Centuries later, economists would put names to what Newton lived through: speculative mania, herd behavior, irrational exuberance. But Newton didn't need the words. He had lived the meaning. And if you look closely, every financial chart today still traces the same shape. That perfect curve of euphoria, denial, and despair. Every peak and crash a reminder that no matter how advanced we become, we're still playing the same psychological game. Because investing isn't about numbers, it's about stories. The South Sea Company didn't sell products, it sold dreams of wealth, of status, of freedom. And in that sense, it wasn't a scam. It was a mirror reflecting our eternal hunger for more. Newton didn't lose because he believed in trade. He lost because he believed in the story. And stories, when told beautifully enough, can defeat even the sharpest mind. But perhaps that's also what makes human progress possible. Because without that same ability to dream, to believe the impossible, there would be no discovery, no innovation, no future. So maybe the madness Newton witnessed wasn't just a flaw. Maybe it was the price of evolution. After all, the same curiosity that built bubbles also built telescopes. The same hope that drove people to gamble their fortunes also drove explorers to cross oceans. The same hunger that makes us foolish also makes us divine. And that's why Newton's story still matters, not just as a warning, but as a reflection. Because the market, like gravity, always teaches the same lesson. What rises fast and will fall faster. But what falls gives us wisdom. Newton's fall gave birth to modern economics. His silence inspired others to study not just money, but human behavior. And that, in a strange way, made his failure one of the most valuable investments in history. He lost gold, but gained truth. And 300 years later, we're still quoting his words, still proving him right, still falling for the same illusions he fell for. Maybe that's what makes this story timeless. Because every time a new bubble forms, kiddo, whether it's .coms, NFTs or AI, Newton's ghost still watches. And somewhere he smiles, half amused, half heartbroken, knowing we'll have to learn gravity again. So, the next time someone says, "It's different this time," remember Newton. Remember the South Sea, and remember that even the laws of physics can't save you from the laws of greed. Because history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And every rhyme starts the same way, with a whisper, a promise, and a crowd convinced they've beaten gravity. And when it all falls again, as it always does, someone new will say the same old line, "I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of men." But the story doesn't end there. Because only a few years after Newton's fall, another man, a gambler, an economist, a magician with money, would step onto the stage. He would turn an entire country into his own laboratory. And unlike Newton, he didn't just lose in a bubble, he created one. His name was John Law. And that, my friend, is where the next chapter begins.